I think we should start off by recognising that the life choices that adults make, in whatever way they make them, are to be respected and not to be criticised in any way. This is not in any way a criticism of anybody who chooses a trans identity or who identifies as trans or who chooses any other identity or identifies in any other way. This is simply about the experimentation on children. Now, let's be absolutely clear. We would not tolerate any form of medical experimentation on children in such an uncertain category with any other treatment. And we would, quite rightly, put forward the Hippocratic Oath of to do no harm. So to change that, particularly on a group of children who are, by very definition, most often already suffering from some other element of potential harm, including, as one of our honourable members mentioned, autism, would be to victimise, or rather to re-victimise, children who are already vulnerable. Now, that's where this has got to be so delicately treated and so carefully treated, because the truth is this is getting wrapped up in identity politics. It's being played with politically by those who wish to, as it were, advertise their own progressive credentials, forgetting that this is very fundamentally about one thing. It is about the protection of children. Now, whatever... I won't give way. Now, whatever the views are of those people in this room and those honourable members who also are going to speak, there is a second element that this government really must consider, because we are already, quite rightly, seeing honourable individuals like Keira Bell who have raised the problem of detransitioning and possibly the legislation, or rather the legal costs of their actions against the state. What money has the government set aside for legal action for those who are, by definition, too young to consent because they are not 18 years old, and by definition are therefore able to bring legal action against the state for any experimentation that was done on them, as would have been in this circumstance? Thank you.
Children deserve protection, not experimentation. In Upper Bann alone, 1,300 people signed this petition, more than twice the number of any other constituency. Their message is clear, and I stand with them. Animal testing on mice and monkeys show that puberty blockers cause irreversible damage to brain development. If these hormones are unfit for animals, why on earth are we about to inject them into our children? Children are once again being used as lab rats for a dangerous medical experiment. It is wrong. We should not be experimenting on a fresh cohort. Instead, we should be prioritising a data linkage study of the hundreds of children who were given puberty blockers at the now discredited and closed Tavistock Clinic. It is reckless to allow minors to take certain risks while they are still maturing. All participants will be under 16. We do not allow these teenagers to drive, get married, buy alcohol or own a gun. We should not be putting them on a medical pathway with such life-altering consequences. In fact, for most children who are questioning their gender, going through puberty will naturally resolve their gender dysphoria. We should be offering vulnerable young people support and stability, not giving them life-altering drugs. We also should send a shiver down our spine when we look at the documentation around the safeguarding. Participants are warned against getting pregnant while taking puberty blockers. There's no mention of the fact that the legal age of consent is 16. Even more concerningly, girls will be advised to consider getting their eggs harvested, normally a procedure for IVF or cancer treatment. Complications include ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, which can cause severe abdominal pain and even death. There's no mention of these risks in the document. I have personally met Keira Bell. She is sounding the alarm for anyone who will listen. Doctors did not give her holistic care. Instead, they affirmed her false belief that hasty medical intervention was the answer. I and my constituents say we need a total ban, not just a temporary pause to this dystopian medical trial.
Sarah Poacham.
Thank you, Mr. Mundell, serve under your chairmanship. I concern myself with the motivation behind these trials. I went to the initial meeting when we met the panel of so-called experts hosted by Wes Streeting, and I came away with the impression that this was nothing more than a spine-chilling, state-sponsored experiment on our children, with no regard to the safeguarding of those children. And what I also asked for in the chamber of Wes Streeting was that he introduces statutory legislation so that he introduces statutory legislation to access the extensive data that is already available from Tavistock, and yet, again, I was not provided with an answer as to why he couldn't do that. I'm concerned about the profile of the children being used. I asked at that initial meeting for a lower age limit. I was refused. I asked if they would consider not including vulnerable children, children in care, children on drugs for anxiety, ADHD. We were refused. We've all talked about the long-term damage that seems to be ignored. But one of the most important things that hasn't really been covered is parental consent. We've heard that only one parent needed to consent where there was a parent present in a child's life. That will damage irreversible damage to families that can cause. And I hosted a round table last week about the indoctrination of our children in schools on this very subject, and heard horrific stories from isolated parents whose children were lost to them because of brainwashing and the fantasy world that they've been taught in school. No, I won't. And finally, overall, we are creating a generation of lost, anxious young people confused about their identity, socially insecure and physically scarred.
It's a pleasure serving under your chairmanship. And the truth is, this clinical trial is flawed, and we should not be experimenting on children. I believe that we should be protecting children from many harms, such as alcohol, nicotine, the age of consent for sexual intercourse, and also for marriage. We have those things to protect children. And it's important to remember that children's prefrontal cortex does not develop until their mid-20s. So even their ability to grasp the long-term effects of any decision is limited. And whilst the diagnosis for this trial is necessary, it is not sufficient in determining whether medical intervention should take place. Cass directly makes this point, and I quote, "Although a diagnosis of gender dysphoria has been seen as necessary for initiating medical treatment, it is not reliably predictive of whether that young person will have long-standing gender incongruence in the future, or whether medical intervention will be the best option for them. The Pathway trial uses ICD-11 diagnosis of gender incongruence, which simply requires a desire to transition. The diagnosis is subjective, based on how the child feels. Can the long-term risk of medical intervention be justified by such a vague diagnosis? If the core diagnostic tool cannot predict outcomes with confidence, this trial would expose children to harm without a sound basis for believing that the medical intervention is in their best interest. The trial has been framed as a pathway to clarity, yet it is flawed before it has even begun, and so proceeding is not neutrality, but a decision with consequences. This trial would see harmful, long-term, and irreversible damage to children and should be cancelled."
Jim Alliston.
As politicians, we all profess that we are interested in protecting the vulnerable. Well, if we are, surely one of the most vulnerable age ranges in our society are those going through adolescence. And therefore, if ever there's a need for protection, it is the adolescents that we need to protect. Feelings and behaviours fluctuate during adolescence. That is, I'm sure, the experience of us all as parents, etc. And so gender dysphoria, more often than not, resolves naturally during puberty. That's the reality. And yet, for too long in our society, we've had this laissez-faire attitude to puberty blockers. Until 2024, no restraint whatsoever. And the question that I raise is, what was the damage done to those children before this pause was imposed? Does no one care about the damage that was done to those children? Because it is, whether one likes the word or not, experimentation on children. And experimentation without a due process of consent. It is incapable of having a due process of consent. And therefore, when we endorse puberty blockers, we are turning a blind eye to the fact it might have medical consequences on their bone density. It might have medical consequences on the development of their brains. Do we not care about that? If we care about that, then we need to cancel, not just pause, this programme.
Rebecca Smith.
Thank you, Mr. President.